Well, thanks for the introduction, and thanks everyone for sticking around for the very last session of the day. If no one from the District of Columbia has welcomed you to DC yet, welcome. As the city representative, that tends to be part of my job. As the introduction said, I am with the Department of Energy and Environment here in the District of Columbia. So we are the local agency that is tasked with all things environment and energy related. In one of the many ways that the district is a unique jurisdiction, we're also a lot like a state. So as you may be aware, we're not actually a state, unfortunately, but all of the regulatory issues that happen at the state level, like enforcing the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act, actually happens within my city agency, meaning that we have a pretty big and diverse team and work on a lot of different issues. But I'm going to talk about a couple of things. First, I'm going to talk about why we see climate change as a health issue here in DC. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about our comprehensive sustainability plan called Sustainable DC and some of the ways we developed and are implementing that plan so you can get an idea of how, as a health professional, you may engage in those types of processes in your own cities. And then finally, since the panel is called Urban Solutions, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that we're using to address climate change here in the district. So first to start, I'm sure you have all been hearing about this all day, but we really do see climate change as a health issue here in the district. We have hot summers already, and they're only going to get hotter. And so we know that means a future with more heat-related illnesses and more poor air quality days. We had a stretch of summers from 2010 to 2012 that broke just about every temperature record that we had on the books. And at the same time, we also saw our ozone and air quality alert days spike back up to levels we hadn't seen in quite a while. So we know there's a direct connection between a hotter future and a future where we need to do more to be addressing health and air quality in particular. And like I said, it's only going to get hotter. So this chart is from a new study that we just released as part of our climate adaptation planning process. We developed localized projections of what climate change is going to mean for the district. And one of the indicators we looked at was how many days are we going to see when the heat index, so that includes humidity, when the heat index goes over 95. And that's the threshold that we use here in the district when we activate our heat emergency plan. So if you ever get those heat emergency alerts on your phone or hear about it on the news, this is the threshold that we use. And you can see that by mid-century, we're looking at more than 3 times as many days with the heat index above 95. And then by the 2080s, essentially the entire summer could be above 95. So that means our heat emergency plan would just become our summer plan, essentially. The difference in the orange and the yellow there are the emission scenarios. So orange is an emission scenario where we actually do see global emissions start to decline. So you can see we're going to see a hotter future regardless. The yellow is what happens if we don't take significant action globally to reduce emissions. So especially in the later years, that can have a real impact on what we're going to see here in DC. So what are we going to do about it? As a big city, we have a lot of sustainability challenges, climate change being one of them. And recognizing that, about 3-4 years ago, we launched a process to develop a plan. The mayor at the time gave the city a charge that he wanted a plan that would make the District of Columbia the healthiest, greenest, and most livable city in the United States. And he called it Sustainable DC. So we had to come up with a plan for first identifying what the key challenges the district was facing were, and then what we were going to do about them. So the plan sets out a framework where we identified 4 citywide challenges. And you'll see here that it's a lot broader than just climate change and environmental issues, because we realize that all of these challenges are related. When we went out and asked the community what are the key challenges facing our city, this is what they told us needed to be addressed. So you'll see health and wellness actually came out as a key challenge in and of itself. And under that, we talk about things like promoting active and healthy lifestyles, cutting the obesity rate in the city, and all the strategies that we can do as a city to help promote health. And then you can see climate and the environment also came out as one of the top challenges. And then the plan walks through 143 different actions, which I will not get into in any level of detail. But they're sort of divided up into these 7 solution areas of the built environment, energy, so how much we use and where we get it from, our food system, nature, which even in a big urban city, we do have quite a few natural habitats here in the district. And for the first time this year, we had bald eagles nesting along the Anacostia River for the first time in decades. That's very exciting. Our transportation system, our waste management system, and then finally water. So we developed this plan with a significant amount of community input and involvement. And this is where these types of processes are where health professionals can play a really valuable role in providing expertise to the city in developing their plans. So what we did is we started with the vision, so those 4 challenges. We did a huge kickoff meeting, and then we took thousands of suggestions online. And then once we had the vision of what the plan was going to be, we broke up into working groups. So there were 9 working groups that met over the course of almost a year and involved more than 700 residents. And they came up with what we ended up with 143 actions. Those were proposed by the community and then prioritized through this process. And then finally, we worked with a lot of experts, both within district government agencies, but we also reached out to our local universities, and we formed a green cabinet of business and private sector leaders. So there were a lot of levels of input into the plan. And that's really continued now that we're implementing the plan. We realized pretty quickly that the city government alone could never accomplish all 143 of those actions. So we very quickly started reaching out to some of the big sectors that we have here in the district. And the first one, the picture at the top, those are actually embassies. So one of the unique things about DC is that one of our big sectors is actually the diplomatic sector. So we did a pledge where 77 of the embassies located here in DC have committed to making their operations greener and more sustainable. And then we reached out to the universities, because that's also a very big sector here in DC, and had them come up with and sign a pledge with our mayor around some of their operations and what they can do as universities and thought leaders to really push forward solutions. And then finally, we actually reached out to the health sector. So hospitals and community healthcare clinics are both a big part of the economy here in DC, but also a really important avenue to connect with citizens. So the health sector pledge that we formed is very diverse. It has over 20 very large hospitals and very small community clinics involved in it, which, to be honest, has raised a lot of challenges, because the sustainability challenges and the resources available to those very different types of institutions has made it a little bit of a challenge to come together around specific issues. But what brings the group together is really just wanting to be involved at the local level in promoting health and sustainability. So we're now about 2 years. We just finished our 2nd year of implementation of Sustainable DC, and we're making a lot of progress, which is good news. Although it is a 20-year plan, so that's why only 8% of the actions are complete at this point. We actually did set quite a few longer-term actions that are going to take us a while to accomplish. But one of the things we did to help kickstart implementation was the mayor put out a pot of money, essentially, and there was an innovation challenge where district agencies and some of our partners, like the University of the District of Columbia, could compete for money to do pilot projects to start to kick off some of these initiatives. And so that's why we've been able to build new playgrounds, new community gardens, and to start composting in our local schools. So now I want to shift gears a little bit to start to talk about some of the specific solutions that a city like DC, or even I would say a lot of cities across the US, are using, not only to address climate change, but what we really look for are those solutions that are going to help us maximize co-benefits. So whether that's for health, health and air quality, or livability, economic development. So the solutions I'm going to show you are some that really do bring together all of those multiple benefits. So the first is green infrastructure, which is a wonky term that basically means we're going to start using green space and vegetation and plants to do some of the work that our gray infrastructure, so our tunnels and culverts and our drainage system does in helping us manage stormwater runoff. So runoff is a huge issue for cities like DC, where we're very built up and we're surrounded by rivers. So every time it rains, all of that water ends up either in our rivers or at our wastewater treatment plant, which then gets treated and ends up in our rivers. So this is a really big challenge for us. And green infrastructure really helps us address that issue while at the same time creating green space in the city, which helps keep the city cool as we're facing a hotter future. It can help with air quality, and it also just makes the city a nicer place to live. So this photo is a park called Canal Park, which was just put in down by our baseball stadium, if you have a chance to go to that neighborhood. And what's great about it is it's actually a district stormwater system. So all of the buildings surrounding this park, instead of feeding into our storm sewer system, are sending all of their stormwater that runs off their roofs and their sidewalks into this park, and then they use the water to maintain the plants, and then in the winter there's an ice skating rink. They have a splash park in the summer, and that's all using water that's been reclaimed and treated through a natural process. So it's a really cool spot if you have a chance to check it out. In addition to using green infrastructure to manage stormwater, we're also trying to aggressively expand our tree canopy. So you can see this map here. The green is where the city has a good, healthy tree canopy. You can see a lot of pink right in the middle. That's downtown. That's where it's mostly impervious surfaces and buildings. And the yellow is where there's some grass and shrubs you can see along the mall, for example. It's yellow. But we are trying to expand our tree canopy by at least 8,000 trees a year. And that involves both planting new trees and making sure we're taking care of the trees that we already have. So we have a lot of policies in place where if you're building a new building, you need to get a permit to cut down your existing trees. You need to explain why essentially you're doing that. And then we have what's called a green area ratio in our zoning code that requires any new building project, essentially it's a point system, and you have to reach a certain number of points by either planting trees, doing things like green roofs, landscaping the sidewalk area in front of your building, all to get up to what is required points. That's actually, I think we're one of the only cities in the country that has actually written that into their zoning code, although I know a lot of other cities have expressed interest in it. So I've talked about sort of the built environment. One of the other big sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the district, actually about 20% of our emissions, is the transportation sector. So our cars, our buses, our trucks. And we recognize that as the district government, we actually own and operate a lot of those cars and trucks and buses. So we're doing everything we can to green our fleet while also encouraging the private sector fleets, so, FedEx, Peapod grocery delivery. I don't know if you guys have grocery delivery in your cities. So we're trying to model what a green fleet looks like and then working with the private sector to get them to green their fleets as well. So a couple of things that we've been doing. The district government has a fleet share system where instead of every agency buying the certain number of vehicles they think they need, we actually have basically Zipcar for the district government where we can just reserve a car for when we need it. And that's actually allowed us to cut the size of our fleet and really reduced trips, because if you have to make a reservation, you actually start to think about, well, could I take the metro to that meeting? Do I really need to drive? Another thing that my agency is piloting is replacing some of our cars with bicycles. So we go out and do inspections and enforcement of our environmental laws all over the city. So we do use cars, but what we found is that for a lot of those jobs, it's actually easier to take a bike. So we have a fleet of bikes that we share. And then this photo is one of the newest additions to our fleet, which is our first electric bike. So this was built by a company that's based here in DC called Ride Bicycles. And the hope is that it really will start to replace the car trips that we're taking as an agency. And it's pretty fun to ride, too. The other thing as a government that we have a lot of is buildings. So the district government has about 250 acres of rooftops that we own and that we control. And rooftops can either be something that can be a part of the problem. If they are black rooftops, for example, they can contribute to making the city hotter. But what we've really started to do is to think about our rooftops as a part of the solution. So we have a smart roof initiative where we went out and looked at all 245 acres of our rooftops to see which ones were candidates for solar, which ones were candidates for green roofs, and which ones were candidates for cool roofs. And so now we have a whole strategy where anytime we need to do a roof upgrade, we know what that roof can be used for. And based on that, we actually issued one of the largest power purchase agreement requests of any city in the country, where we're looking to install over 10 megawatts of solar on more than 50 of our public building rooftops. So that deal is in process now. It hasn't been finalized yet, but will go a long way to supplying the district's electricity, the power we use for our own buildings. I think this photo is actually from the solar decathlon that happens every other year on the mall. So that's not a public building. That's actually a solar decathlon project, but I love that it had the Capitol building in the background, so. So I get a lot of questions coming from a city and a lot of sort of what as one city can we really do to address big issues like climate change? No matter how much we reduce our emissions, even if we hit our 80% reduction goal by 2050, that's a drop in the bucket when you think about what we need to do on a global scale. And while that's true, I guess first I would say, but if every city does that, we can make a lot of progress. And then the second thing I say is at the same time, we can have local impacts from our local actions. And one really great example of this has to do with the urban heat island effect. Does everyone know what I'm referring to? You know, anytime you watch a weather forecast, you can see the central city in your area is always going to be at least a few degrees, if not more, warmer than the surrounding areas. That's definitely true here in the district. So we actually did a study where we worked with a number of public health and climate science experts to say, what if we did all of these things that we want to do in terms of cool roofs, green infrastructure? How much of an impact could we actually have on the number of people that are dying because of heat-related illness? And we were able to model that, and you can see this is the type of output that we got. And this is the change in temperature that increasing the amount of our surfaces that were either reflective or green could have on the district. And you can see the darker blue is the bigger change. So you're able to reduce temperatures by about 1 degree, which doesn't sound like much, but from a public health perspective, that can have a really big impact. And so what we found was that we could reduce the number of deaths during heat events by an average of 7%. So local actions really can have a big local impact. The red there, that's the Chesapeake Bay. So we're not going to have any, that's because there's no change, essentially. We're not going to have any impact on the temperature of the Chesapeake Bay. And then finally, I wanted to end with a little bit about the Clean Power Plan, since I know that's what you all will be talking about tomorrow, and how it impacts DC. We're in a little bit of a unique position here in the district in that we do not have any fossil fuel power plants located in the district, so we were not actually given an emission standard under the new rule that we're going to have to meet. So it's us and the state of Vermont that are sort of the asterisk in the rule. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot at stake when it comes to the Clean Power Plan. Because we don't have any power plants, that means we import nearly all of our electricity. Along with that electricity, we're also importing most of our air pollution from states in the region, mainly to our north and to the west. So we know that the Clean Power Plan is going to have significant benefits for the district in terms of improved air quality. It's also going to help us lower our own greenhouse gas emissions, because we have to buy our electricity for now from an electric grid that has all of these fossil fuel generating resources feeding power into it. So we take that into account when we think about our carbon footprint. So if all the states around us are starting to clean up their power plants and shift to renewable energy, that's going to have a really big impact on us. And then finally, it's going to give us more options to use our own purchasing power to invest in renewable energy. So the district government as a power purchaser is pretty large because we have all of those buildings. And so we are really looking at ways that we can start to use our own purchasing power to support the renewable energy market in our region. This is a wind farm in Pennsylvania with a DC flag flying over one of the turbines. And the reason that flag is there is that we just signed a 20-year agreement to buy all of the electricity that is put out by this wind farm in Pennsylvania. That's going to provide about 35% of the electricity we need to run the government, and it's going to cut our carbon footprint by 100,000 tons. And we want to be able to do more of this. So as the Clean Power Plan supports more wind farms like this one in Pennsylvania, then we'll have more places to invest. And hopefully, as a region, we can start to really support a big increase in renewable energy. So that's why we've been really supportive of the Clean Power Plan. We've submitted testimony and comments and are doing what we can to support it, even though we don't have a direct role in its implementation yet. So that's it.